She said it was on her desk. Remember that? And why has the administration not yet released all the draft indictments or the FBI's victim and witness statements, which criminally implicate specific individuals? Why isn't Chairman Comer demanding answers from FBI Director Kash Patel, who said under oath that, quote, there is no credible information that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked minors, end quote? Why aren't they subpoenaing Mar-a-Lago, Trump's, documents which appear directly linked to Epstein's trafficking ring? And why, after over a year of broken promises and after a federal law required that all files be posted a month ago, why are we still waiting? If they have nothing to hide, if everything is on the up and up, why is this administration acting guilty? Why are they exposing the names of victims, which they are specifically not allowed to do so, instead of the names of the men who raped and abused them? Here's what their attorney said in response to the latest release, and I quote, there is no conceivable degree of institutional incompetence sufficient to explain the scale, consistency, and persistence of the failures that occurred. Madam Chair, we should listen to the victims. And here's what the victims say, and I quote, once again, survivors are having their names and identifying information exposed, while the men who abused us remained hidden and protected. The victims go on to say, and I quote, the public still does not have the full truth about who enabled Epstein, who participated in his exploitation, and who has been shielded for years. It is time to demand transparency and accountability from anyone who is involved in or has knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, no matter their political party, up to and including the current president of the United States, who is in these files up to his eyeballs. And Madam Chair, we are also considering today another crummy bill to try to strip the District of Columbia of even more autonomy. And let me just say, I am tired of the constant attacks on the residents of the District of Columbia. They pay taxes, their sons and daughters serve in our military, and they don't have a vote in this Congress. It is shameful. And on top of all of that, this Republican-led Congress tries to micromanage their budgets and their lives. It is wrong. And we're also going to be debating a bill that helps mining CEOs rewrite the very environmental regulations which help constrain their actions. More giveaways to polluters while Republicans do nothing to lower prices. I'm voting no on all of these things. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Without objection, any prepared statements that our witnesses may have will be included in the record. I now welcome our first panel, Chairman Cole, former chairman of this committee, and Ranking Member DeLauro from the Committee on Appropriations. Your full statement will be submitted for the record, and we ask that you summarize your statement in 5 minutes. Chairman Cole, I welcome your testimony.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Chairwoman Fox, Ranking Member McGovern, members of the Rules Committee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today. While the moment certainly feels familiar, the issues before us remain critically important. Let me start with a simple reminder. Legislating is challenging by design. The path here may have been different than expected, but our responsibility is the same, to fund the government and keep it working for the nation. Members are already acquainted with the legislation at hand. The underlying package was assembled and passed by the House 2 weeks ago and represents the final 6 FY26 appropriations measures. It has now been sent back with a Senate amendment that fully funds 5 divisions for the year and places the remaining division, the Department of Homeland Security, under a 2-week continuing resolution. To underscore the scope of funding before us, today's full year bills cover the Department of Defense, the Departments of Labor, Health and Human Services, and Education, the Departments of Transportation and Housing and Urban Development, the Department of State, the Department of the Treasury, and many agencies related to each of these departments. Funding these missions is not optional. It's part of our Article 1 duties, and we must see them work through. 2 weeks ago, the House and Senate struck a bipartisan and bicameral deal to move forward on our remaining appropriations bills for fiscal year 2026. As I knew we would, the House acted expeditiously and appropriately and approved these negotiated bills before leaving for our scheduled district work period. Now, however, the Senate has altered the deal. I acknowledge the frustrations of this situation, and I share in those sentiments. Trust me, I speak from direct experience, but our obligation is not to our feelings, it's to the American people. Getting 90% of something is better than 100% of nothing. I still believe the best and most appropriate course of action was for the Senate to approve the 6-bill package as we negotiated it. The Senate, however, has chosen a different path. And so we are left here in the House with a classic Hobson's choice. We can take the amended bill or we can leave it. My view is that we should take it. Today's bill will close out 5 of our remaining 6 appropriations bills for FY 2026, including our 2 largest measures covering defense and the Labor, Health and Human Services and Education departments. It will also include a 2-week continuing resolution for our 6th and final bill, the Department of Homeland Security, which will give some time for additional negotiations on that measure. President Trump has directly engaged Democrats in good faith conversations while making clear that holding the government or the American people hostage is wrong. I'm confident that once these discussions are completed, the final outcome will closely mirror the measure Chairman Amodei negotiated and the House passed 2 weeks ago, a comprehensive bill that, unlike this stopgap, funded ICE body-worn cameras and de-escalation training, delivered a pay raise for our Coast Guard and our air traffic controllers, granted funding to support firefighters and first responders, strengthened disaster preparedness, and enhanced efforts to combat fentanyl. So today is Groundhog Day, both literally and figuratively, but doing the right thing for the American people never gets old. I thank each of you for your time, and I urge all members to support this bipartisan package, and I look forward to answering your questions later today.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Ranking Member DeLauro, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, and say thank you to you, Chairman Fox, and Ranking Member McGovern, and the members of the Rules Committee. Appreciate the opportunity to testify today alongside my friend, Chairman Cole. The 5 full-year funding bills before us today are strong bipartisan compromises, and I am pleased those remain intact. The House cleared these bills last month with strong bipartisan votes, and I look forward to seeing these bills become law. They reject the Trump administration's efforts to eviscerate public services, reversing a $163 billion in domestic spending cuts proposed by the president. They protect important Democratic priorities, national priorities, and they reassert Congress's power of the purse. What is different between what the House and Senate have cleared is the duration of funding provided for the Department of Homeland Security. Instead of providing funding through the end of September, the measure before us extends funding for 10 days to allow for tough negotiators and tough negotiations to produce an agreement on binding and enforceable measures that protect our communities. They protect our communities from being terrorized and ensure accountability for any abuses. I opposed the bill that came out of the House because it simply endorsed a continuation of ICE policies, a rogue, lawless agency. We need to take these next 10 days to work to radically reform ICE. That means provisions to require judicial warrants, prohibit U.S. citizens from being detained or deported, strengthen oversight and reconciliation funds, mandate the use of body-worn cameras, and establish an enforceable code of conduct. That means masks off, badges on, real accountability for the egregious abuses that we have seen. The killings of Alex Pretty and Renee Good have shocked the conscience of this nation. Renee had just dropped her 6-year-old son off at school and was on her way home. She had her dog in the back seat of her car. She told the agent recording her, and I quote, "I'm not mad at you," end quote, before turning the steering wheel away from him. He shot her 3 times in the chest and head, including through the open driver's side window as her car passed by him. After video emerged of the killing, the Trump administration accused her of domestic terrorism. Instead of investigating her death, they investigated her wife. In October of last year, Stephen Miller asserted that these agents have, quote, remarks again, just to make sure that everyone got the message. Let me give you a reminder that during the first Trump administration, Stephen Miller was an unelected bureaucrat. He was the architect of the family separation policy. And today, there are a number of those children who were separated who have yet to be reunited with their families. 2.5 weeks later, Alex Preddy was assaulted by several masked federal agents, pepper sprayed, pistol whipped, and then shot 10 times in broad daylight. His only crime was that he was recording the officers on his phone. Video circulating after the killing showed an officer clapping and cheering excitedly as Preddy was shot dead. He was not there to hurt anyone. He was helping a woman who had been thrown to the pavement, unprovoked, by the same agents who would murder him moments later. The Trump administration proclaimed that he too was a domestic terrorist, that he was an assassin, that he intended to gun down federal officers. None of those smears contain an ounce of truth. He was not a terrorist. He was a nurse at a VA hospital who was trying to protect his community from unlawful abuses by Customs and Border Protection. He had no criminal record. He has not been charged with any crime. After sustained public outcry, the Department of Justice announced the Civil Rights Division has opened an investigation into his killing. This has to stop. There must be accountability, not only for those officers who killed Alex Preddy and Renee Good, but for all those who have been beaten, harassed, intimidated, and unlawfully detained law-abiding citizens and residents who were simply going about their lives when the agents crossed their path. I will support this package, which secures funding for the 5 bipartisan bills which fund the Department of Defense, Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development, Health and Human Services, Labor and Education, State and Treasury for the rest of this fiscal year, which extends funding at current levels for DHS for 10 days. What does that do? That gives us time and it gives us leverage to secure the protections that we need for our communities. For if we do not do that, we will not be able to bring the kinds of pressure that is necessary to make sure that ICE does not continue to terrorize our communities. The American people are demanding these protections. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. DeLauro. I'm going to defer my questions until later. Ms. Fishbach, recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate you both being here. And I think, Mr. Cole, you said it felt like deja vu. But very quickly, I think you mentioned in your opening statement that there was an agreement. This was all agreed because when we left, it was our understanding. We voted, we passed it out. My understanding that the Senate was all set up and it was going to be done.
That's your statement's correct. There was an agreement with the Senate. The bills had been negotiated in a bipartisan fashion. We tried to work closely with our Democratic colleagues, both the House and the Senate, to send it to them in the manner in which they requested. My friend, the ranking member, requested one thing, wanted a separate vote on that bill. We worked hard to secure that vote, and you were kind enough on this committee to give us that opportunity. And then, look, I've been arguing all along, we should have been doing this earlier in smaller packages. I just think that's a better way to proceed. But the Senate wanted 6 in one bill. And so they got what they asked for. And then they decided the situation, and I'm not going to speak for them, but obviously what happened in Minnesota impacted the deliberations of the Senate, and they changed the deals. That wasn't done in consultation. They basically broke one out. That was a direct negotiation, as I understand it, between the president and the minority leader in the United States Senate. Procedurally, that requires us then to look at the packages again. But there's no substantive disagreement on the 5 bills that we've negotiated in either chamber. I mean, they've passed the Senate, and if we take them up on the floor and pass them here, those will become law. As my friend, the ranking member, said, the remaining one is a 2-week extension, so other negotiations can occur. And I would assume at that point, they'll either come to a conclusion or not, and we'll be dealing with that bill again. But what we won't do is derail the rest of the government. 94% of the government will be funded. Our military will be paid. Our borders will be secure. Important, research programs and programs that support our most vulnerable will happen. We don't have disagreement there, or the disagreements we have been resolved through negotiation. So putting those things through, I think, is the right thing to do. Working on the area that is still a matter of contention is probably the appropriate thing to do as well. Again, I would have preferred all 6 be accepted as negotiated. This is the second time the Senate has done this. We had a negotiation last year. They asked for a clean CR, which they got. They asked for a short-term CR, which they got. And then they introduced extraneous matters, which were health care, Obamacare era subsidies, and undoing Medicaid reforms that Congress had enacted into law and the president signed earlier last year. So, it's pretty hard dealing with the United States Senate because when you've got an agreement, they don't feel bound by the agreement that had. So again, we're sort of used to this, but I would rather preserve the really 94% of funding where we have agreed, get that taken care of. That shouldn't be subject to this debate or this controversy, and then move on. There's clearly negotiations at the highest level going on the Department of Homeland Security right now. There have been a number of moves by both parties, by the president, by the Senate, to continue this discussion. So obviously we would deal with that at that point. But I don't think we should miss the opportunity of passing into law things we agree on to keep the government shut down. I mean, literally, if we don't act on this, we're going to be back at the point where people that keep our skies safe aren't getting paid, where promised pay raises to air traffic controllers and the Coast Guard don't happen, where we don't have money in reserve for a natural disaster. We have one undergoing right now, where our men and women that protect us overseas wonder whether or not they're going to get paid or their families here are going to be safe. So let's solve the range of problems where we have very substantial bipartisan agreement and negotiation, and then work on this remaining problem.
And Mr. Cole, I agree with you, and I am hoping that a majority of the folks, when these get to the floor, do agree with you, because you're absolutely right. We need to keep the 94% open, and I'm just sorely disappointed that, I mean, when we left, and the Senate was supposed to come in, that the agreement that was struck was not honored, and it's deeply disappointing, because I know that everybody worked very hard, and we took the votes to make sure that that would happen. So it's unfortunate, but I do think, that at this point, you're right. We need to keep the 94% open and let that bit that's being held hostage, essentially, until they get their way, that we've got the 2 weeks to deal with it. But in the meantime, let's get the other done. Did you want to say something? You looked like at one point you were going to say something.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, then I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Fishbuck. Mr. McGovern, you're recognized.
Yeah, well, I don't really want to spend a lot of time on the substance of the bills before us, because I said a lot in my opening statement, but surely you understand what why there's so much controversy over all of this. I mean, we have two Americans that are dead, shot right before our very eyes. And you had the Secretary of Homeland Security, you had Stephen Miller, and you had Greg Bavino just lie about it, just lie. And so there's a problem here in terms of trust. I mean, I don't trust them at all. And I don't trust this administration. I mean, even in the last few days, the president has been all over the map on responding to the tragedies. I don't trust them to tell me the correct time, never mind to negotiate in good faith on guardrails on ice. So I mean, that's where the angst is. That's where a lot of the concern from the American people is coming from, is that they're seeing one thing with their own eyes and being told something very different by this administration. And there's, and I guess they can't bring themselves to say they were wrong or that they apologize. And it is chilling. I'm just telling you, it is. I mean, but I appreciate the fact, I appreciate the work that both of you do. I appreciate the work of your staff. I know these are not ordinary times, but I just want to clarify the record, the historical record. Because since you both testified on the funding bills a few weeks ago, I've been reading some of the press coming out of some of my friends on the other side of the aisle, some of the press releases and the tweets from Republicans saying that regular order has finally been restored for the first time in decades. So one House Republican said, quote, "For the first time in 29 years, the House has passed all appropriations bills. With a one-seat majority, regular order has returned," end quote. Senator Langford congratulated the Republicans on the Appropriations Committee on this accomplishment, saying, quote, "That's no small feat," and referring to you, Chairman Cole, he's the first appropriations chair to do so since 1997, end quote. But just, and again, I have great respect for both of you, but just I have to ask, is this really the first time since 1997 that the House has passed all 12 appropriation bills? Yes or no?
I have no idea. I'm focused on what's in
Yeah.
front of me, which is trying to get these bills
Yeah, but
passed.
just for the record, the correct answer is no. This is not the first time in 29 years the House passed all 12 appropriation bills. The 1997 record that people on your side keep referring to is the last time that Congress passed all the required appropriation bills on time, just so that we're all clear. First, 0 appropriation bills were signed into law on time during the past year. 0. And that is why the government shut down in October and why it is partially shut down right now. And second, Congress regularly passes all 12 appropriation bills. It had done so every year for over a decade. That is until last year. We operated under a year-long continuing resolution for the entirety of fiscal year 2025. Let me put that in context. From October 2024 into November 2025, for 13 months, this Republican majority failed to get a single appropriation bill signed into law. In fact, we've continued to operate under a partial CR until we partially shut down over the weekend. This funding cycle, fiscal year 2026, stands out in 2 notable ways. The first way, speaking of setting records, is that for the first time in 30 years, there have been 2 shutdowns in a single funding cycle. 2 shutdowns. Secondly, members have been notably cut out of the amendment process here at the Rules Committee for fiscal year 2026. Only 3 out of the 12 appropriation bills this fiscal year received a call for amendments. Chairman Cole, when you were the Rules Chair during the FY24 cycle, you issued a call for amendments on 11 of the 12 appropriation bills. And during the FY24 cycle, nearly 3 times more appropriation amendments advanced to the House floor than in this cycle. So Republicans may be out here claiming victory on non-existent records, but I think it's important that we understand that this whole process, is abysmal. And I bring this up because truth matters and the facts are the facts. I get it. The administration kind of sets a standard where they can just say whatever the hell they want to say, whether it's based on truth or fact or not. But I think here in this institution, it is important that we not exaggerate or not make things up. And the facts are the facts. And so I say this for the historical record, Madam Chair, Again, I appreciate my colleagues being here, and I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Mr. Roy, you are recognized.
I thank the chair. Mr. Cole, is it true that the bill in front of us, that is the package of 5 of the appropriations bills plus the 14-day CR for Homeland, is appropriating at a level that is less than our current level of funding? Is it
Correct.
done
If you look at all 12 bills, yes.
right. So it would yield a result in total pending the resolution of the full year's Homeland bill. That would be a reduction in spending year over year, putting aside some of the math quirks and how we do accounting, but year over year from 25 to 26.
That's correct. And just for the record, the Homeland bill that this body passed, that the House passed, actually reduced Homeland spending by $600 million. A CR actually restores that since we're continuing the status quo. So, but your point's correct. Yeah, the second year in a row that we've effectively spent less money than was projected at the beginning of the year, less money than we did the year before.
Is it also true that we have, again, in general terms, getting to the dollar to the penny, over the last 3 fiscal years, had spending, discretionary spending, stay relatively flat
That's correct.
for 3 consecutive fiscal years?
That's correct.
Is that a normal occurrence in this town?
No, normally discretionary spending goes up by 3 to 5% a year, sometimes more. And over a 10-year budget window, that's a lot of money. I mean, literally, the savings last couple of years probably amount to something like $500 billion over a 10-year by just simply holding the line. You let revenue catch up with expenditures. So, yeah, there's no question fiscally, this helps correct the course. But again, and you and I have had this discussion often, the main drivers there are the mandatory spending, entitlement spending, whatever you want to use. That's 70+% of the federal budget. Our appropriated money is only about 26% or so of all federal spending. And actually, the Appropriations Committee historically has done a pretty good job of keeping the numbers intact, and an exceptionally good job over the last 3 years.
And is it not also true, without getting too much in the weeds, because this is about discretionary spending, that last summer we obviously passed the big beautiful bill, as has come to be known, that had a significant amount of reforms with respect to mandatory spending? It's a general matter, correct?
Absolutely true.
My point, generally speaking, here is whatever agreements, disagreements we have, that we have moved the needle. Maybe not as far as I would do if I was just a sole decider, maybe farther than some people would choose, but we have moved the needle with respect to the overall spend
That's
of
correct.
our government.
That's correct.
So the other point that I make, and I'll be mindful of the time that we use here, that I think merits observation, is we're going to have a debate, obviously, over the next 2 weeks when the Homeland bill expires. But I do want to remind people of the extent to which the men and women in ICE, Americans, people of all backgrounds, all economic backgrounds, they have been keeping dangerous individuals off of the streets of the United States.
Yes, in my view, that's correct.
And we just gloss over the people when you look at the people removed. For example, an individual here with convictions for homicide and robbery, admitted gang member that was removed from the streets of Minnesota, an individual that was involved with rape, an individual that was involved with assault, forgery, and obstruction, and arrest for drug possession, an individual that was involved with sexual assault and driving under the influence, an individual who is a convicted sex offender and convicted of sodomy on a 12-year-old girl, An individual with multiple arrests for driving under influence, larceny, assault, and making terrorist threats. An individual with aggravated assault with a weapon, larceny, assault, possession of cocaine, and robbery with a gun. An individual with possessions of a weapon and aggravated assault with a gun. An Asian gang member, Asian boys gang member. An individual with fraud, identity theft, and driving under the influence. An individual with driving under the influence, aggravated assault, and weapon assault, and possession of amphetamine. And I could go on and on and on. There's other individuals, multiple counts of credit card fraud, drug possession, controlled substance possession, and drug trafficking. 3 prior convictions for selling amphetamines, as well as convictions for assault. Previously arrested for child cruelty and battery. These are individuals, and I'm only touching just the tip of the iceberg of the individuals that these men and women have been engaged in removing from the streets of the United States as a direct consequence of the policies of the previous administration, with wide open borders, putting individuals onto our streets and endangering the people that we represent. So right now, what we have in front of us is a bill that will only fund Homeland. It will only fund the men and women that are doing that for 14 days. Now, we'll have a debate over the next 14 days about that, but I want to remind people why there are some people who are frustrated that we worked together on a bipartisan basis to produce legislation that funded all of government, and we passed that out last week, and that would carry forth what needs to be done to be able to secure the homeland of the United States, fund our men and women in uniform in the Department of War, fund the other priorities of government at flat spending. And now we're getting this back, and we're going to reduce homeland spending for 2 weeks. To be clear, I'm going to be fighting like hell to ensure that we've got the resources necessary for the men and women of Border Patrol, ICE, and the other people at Homeland Security to secure this nation against violent criminals that are endangering the people of the United States. That is an absolute hard line in the sand. And we will have that battle over the next 2 weeks. Glad to have it. And we can have the battle over the SAVE Act because, yes, only citizens should vote. And we can have the battle over voter ID because of, yes, you should have voter identification to vote. These are common sense, 80% plus issues that poll highly on a bipartisan basis. So we will have those debates. And the final point I'll make that I will say credit to the House and on a bipartisan note, I am thankful that we included in this bill stopping the absurdity of the Senate getting a $500,000 sue and settle payday by being able to put that provision in there. And we had unanimous vote twice in the House to stop it. So I'm thankful to leadership in both chambers for including that in this bill. And with that, I'll yield back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roy. Ms. Scanlon, you're recognized. You yield to
Sorry,
Mr.
yield
McGovern?
first to the ranking member.
The gentleman's recognized.
Well, let me say to the gentleman who just spoke, I agree with him in getting rid of the Lindsey Graham earmark, which was a kind of a payola for Lindsey Graham and some of a few senators. So we agree on that. I also agree that all the bad guys should be removed from the United States. But that's where our agreement ends. I mean, I object to 5-year-olds being detained. I object to American citizens being murdered in the street. I object to off-duty police officers being detained because the color of their skin is brown. In Minnesota, a U.S. citizen said ICE took him at gunpoint in his underwear without a warrant in front of his 4-year-old grandchild. I mean, in another instance, a U.S. citizen went on his lunch break and mass federal agents detained him in a chokehold. In Miami, federal agents ripped a woman from her car as she screamed that she was a U.S. citizen. I mean, in California, a U.S. citizen on his way to work at a food bank pulled over to warn federal agents that they should wrap up their stop of another individual before school-age children gathered for the bus. Moments later, the ICE officer shot him in the back. In Chicago, ICE agents stormed an apartment complex by helicopter as families slept and deployed chemical agents near a public school. I mean, U.S. citizens are carrying their passports out of fear of being detained without cause. There are reports of Native Americans who are U.S. citizens being detained by ICE. 32 people died in ICE custody in 2025. 32, it was ICE's deadliest year in 2 decades. So I'm sorry, that's where we disagree with the gentleman. And I just wanted to say one other thing. I mean, and I'm sorry the gentleman left, but talking about, saving taxpayers, reducing the debt by $500 billion in this package. I'm sorry. I mean, that's laughable when you look at the fact that you added $4 trillion to the debt in the big ugly bill. Now, maybe that kind of funny math works in Texas, but I don't think it works anywhere else in this country. I mean, that's an insult to the American people's intelligence to somehow say that we're being responsible in terms of reducing the debt, you know, when you add $4 trillion to the debt in the big ugly bill. And I thank the gentlelady. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGovern. Like you, I will not be voting for this package. From last week to now, nothing on the ground has changed significantly. We cannot give DHS and ICE a blank check and hopes that things will work out in 2 weeks. That approach fails to meet the moment, and it fails to meet the concerns of an overwhelming majority of Americans who want an immediate end to the violence, lawlessness, and chaos caused by ICE across this country. Look, we need look no further than the habeas corpus case involving 5-year-old Liam, the boy in the blue bunny ears hat, who was detained with his father in Minnesota and shipped off to a detention center in Texas. Trump campaigned on a promise that he would deport the worst of the worst. And if that's what were actually happening, I don't think we would be in anything like this position, but that is not what is happening. 5-year-old Liam is a child, a now traumatized child. He is clearly not the worst of the worst, and neither is his father, who was the excuse for detaining Liam as well. His father has no criminal record, either in the United States or in Ecuador, where he came from. He lawfully applied for asylum in this country. He followed all of our rules and laws. He applied through the app provided by Customs and Border Patrol. He followed all the rules. And he was making his appointments here in the US. He was working as a construction worker to support his family. They were not public charges. So this is a big, ugly, violent charade that we are seeing out on the streets of America, run by Kristi Noem, Stephen Miller, and President Donald J. Trump. Our colleague from Texas says nothing has changed between when these bills passed and the present time. Well, I think what has changed is the hypocrisy of this administration's detention efforts has been exposed. And I just wanted to cite the court opinion in little Liam's case. It's very brief, but very powerful. And the court called out that hypocrisy. The court said, and I quote, "This court and others regularly send undocumented people to prison and orders them deported, but do so by proper legal procedures." Said the problem in this case is it has its genesis in the ill-conceived and incompetently implemented government pursuit of daily deportation quotas, apparently, even if it requires traumatizing children. And Madam Chairwoman, I would ask that I seek unanimous consent to introduce into the record the 3-page opinion from the Texas District.
Without
Court.
objection, Ms. Scanlon, thank you.
Thank you. Look, even after the shooting deaths and even after exposing what happened to little Liam, whose family did not commit any crimes, ICE is still in Minneapolis. Trump is threatening to send ICE to more cities. On Saturday, ICE agents tear gassed and pepper sprayed peaceful labor union marchers in Oregon. ICE agents are still abusing citizens and non-citizens alike. Federal agents are still kidnapping people and children, holding people at gunpoint, citizens and non-citizens alike, and raiding people's houses without warrants. They seem to be becoming even more emboldened to commit these acts rather than backing down. And certainly the administration and Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller are not forcing them to do so. So it's up to us. We've seen ICE collecting data on peaceful protesters, exercising their First Amendment rights, putting them in government databases so they can be harassed. They're abusing people in detention facilities, denying detainees medical care, which has led to avoidable deaths, including one of my constituents. He wasn't one of the 32 people who died in ICE custody last year. He died in ICE custody along with, I think we're up to 6 or 7 now, this year, just a couple weeks ago. I'm not going to vote to give any more money to ICE and to Kristi Noem until we enact concrete laws that can stop the unlawful conduct and violence that ICE is inflicting on America. ICE needs to get out of Minneapolis, no more invasions of city, no more breaking into people's houses, no more arrests without warrants. This week, it's up to Republicans whether the government shuts down. It's their majority. I'm not going to carry their water. We won't be complicit in funding ICE while this utter lawlessness continues. Look, earlier this year, Republicans gave ICE billions in their big ugly bill. They're not going to be hanging out, with a tin cup on the corner looking for money if this doesn't pass right now. But at the same time, our Republican colleagues wouldn't spend a dime on extending the ACA tax credits. 3 months ago, House Republicans refused to extend those tax credits when they passed the prior package of appropriations bills, but they promised to work on the ACA tax credit issue after that round of appropriations passed. I think the speaker said he's going to spend the whole first quarter doing that. Well, the tax credits expired, and House Republicans have not advanced a plan to reduce costs for the millions of Americans who now can't afford their health coverage. On Wednesday, just this past Wednesday, I met with the folks who manage enrollment for Pennsylvania's ACA marketplace, and I heard how many people have lost coverage because of Congress's failure to extend the tax credits. I met with a small business owner whose premiums for his family, including 4 kids, have increased from $1,900 to $3,000 a month. They're paying $36,000 a year for health insurance, a $12,000 increase. Small businesses can't absorb that. It's insane. He doesn't think he can afford to keep his coverage, and he's considering dropping it. But House and Senate Republicans don't care. They're not taking up the bill that we did force through the House. So pardon me if I don't trust a deal with ICE and DHS abuses being addressed if we just push these spending bills through, when they still haven't dealt with the ACA tax credit system, which they promised to do after the last push. It's a little bit like Lucy and Charlie Brown. I'm not seeing the football get pulled aside again. Look, they're rushing through these spending bills. They're refusing to end the government-funded violence in our streets, all the while letting working Americans drown in rising healthcare costs. What does it say about this Congress that it would rather give masked, armed agents billions of dollars while denying healthcare to working people? We are better than this. I sincerely hope we can find a path forward for the spending bills this week, but until then, I oppose this package. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Cole, I know the Democrats want to focus on immigration and customs enforcement, but this is the whole Department of Homeland Security appropriation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so I know that there was an unfortunate accident off of Massachusetts. U.S. Coast Guard performed the search and rescue mission. Unfortunately, they did not find any survivors. That was just a couple of days ago. I think a week ago, the U.S. Coast Guard icebreaker had to go help a cruise ship that was stranded in the ice. Is that correct?
I don't know those two incidents.
Okay, well,
but that would be
it is correct.
Pretty normal, I'm sure it is.
It is correct. But my point is this: Department of Homeland Security is much bigger than immigration and customs enforcement.
It's absolutely correct.
I mean, they're forcing a continuing resolution on the United States Coast Guard. I mean, that's what they're doing. It's Customs and Border Protection is bigger than ICE. I mean, we know that Democrats want open borders. That's what they had under the Biden administration. They allowed, millions upon millions upon millions of people into this country illegally. We have no idea who is in this country. But aside from immigration and customs enforcement, you've got Customs and Border Protection, which is Border Patrol. You've got the Transportation Security Administration, who does a tremendous number of things. Most people know them as the ones that run security at the airports. Is that a fair statement?
That's correct.
Okay. I've already mentioned the U.S. Coast Guard. You've got the Secret Service that's also under Department of Homeland Security. You've got what's known as CISA, the Critical, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. You've got FEMA, which is also under Department of Homeland Security. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Citizenship and Immigration, which is not ICE, but does deal with citizenship and immigration. And then you've got the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers. All of these are under Department of Homeland Security, correct?
Correct.
And when you do the continuing resolution, what does it do to those agencies as well? Does the continuing resolution impact the U.S. Coast Guard?
It certainly does.
I mean, the bottom line is that this is a ridiculous demand from the Democratic Party that we have a continuing resolution for the Department of Homeland Security. The only thing this is better than is a shutdown, but we're going to be right back here in 2 weeks. And I'm sorry that 2 people were shot and killed. I really am. I wish it hadn't happened. It's not lost on me that they happen not just in the same state, but the exact same city. And my understanding right now is that ICE is carrying out operations around the country. ICE isn't just operating in Minneapolis, are they, Mr. Cole?
That's correct.
But the difference is in other states, even if they are a Democratic-run state and a Democratic-run city, those mayors and those governors are allowing the local law enforcement agencies to do their job. And in Minneapolis and in Minnesota, my understanding is that those local law enforcement agencies have been given orders not to do their job. And while I'm sorry that the gentleman is deceased, the fact of the matter is he should have been arrested and put in jail when he kicked out the taillight of the vehicle that the officers were in. And the Democrats don't want to talk about that. And so I intend to vote for the legislation, Mr. Cole. I think that those of us who want this country to move forward and our economy to move forward will continue to vote yes. My understanding is, and I think this is actually a good thing, that the Homeland Security bill that passed the House of Representatives actually had de-escalation training for immigrations and custom enforcement. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And by doing what the Democrats have done, they have stopped the de-escalation training for immigration and custom enforcement. Is that correct?
Correct.
So I think that the de-escalation training is important. And I wish they had not stopped it. I wish that the de-escalation training was there. I hope it'll be in the next piece of legislation that we have as it was the last. And with that, Mr. Cole, I just want the American citizens to know that DHS is much bigger than immigration and customs enforcement. And they are able to operate effectively, more effectively in other states because they have not been given orders by a radical mayor and a radical governor. The local law enforcement and state law enforcement have not been given orders by a radical governor and a radical mayor not to help from the standpoint of what local law enforcement is supposed to do. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield.
Gentleman yields back now. Recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse, for his time of questioning.
I think the chairman, Chairman Cole, I presume you agree with what the gentleman from Georgia said. This is a red state, blue state issue. That's your?
No, I did not.
Oh, you said radical governors versus governors
Hang
not
on.
complying with the law.
Hang on, stop. It's not a
I'm-
debate between the two members.
I hear you. I'm
It's your
asking Mr.
time.
Cole a question.
Yeah, I mean, try not to put words into Mr. Scott's mouth, but at the same time, it's not Mr. Scott's time.
I thank the chairman. How about we do it this way, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Cole, I want to read you a quote. Quote, I think the death of Americans, what we're seeing on TV, it's causing deep concerns over federal tactics and accountabilities. Americans don't like what they're seeing right now. You want to take a guess who might have said that?
No.
The governor of Oklahoma, someone I suspect you know well, Governor Stitt, said that on TV a few weeks ago. So this notion that this is purely an issue in Democratic states, states with Democratic governors or states with Democratic mayors, clearly across the board, you have heard over the course of the last several weeks an outcry among the vast majority of Americans who I think are deeply offended at what they see ICE doing in Minneapolis and beyond. Now, with respect to the gentleman from Georgia, because he talked a lot about the various different sub-agencies within the Department of Homeland Security, I will say he expressed more support for some of these sub-agencies within the department than the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, it sort of is, refrain about FEMA. Secretary Noem has talked about abolishing FEMA. Now we're forced to listen about, from my colleagues, that we must do everything we can to save FEMA from the same people who said nothing when Secretary Noem was discussing abolishing it. Cybersecurity, CISA. The Trump administration has proposed to cut by a third, 1,000 people they're trying to fire at the cybersecurity division. And I'm supposed to take at face value statements from my colleagues that this is that it's outrageous that we would have a continuing resolution for the Department of Homeland Security and the cybersecurity division, that would put them in a tough spot. I think you ought to be complaining to the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Trump administration, not to your Democratic colleagues. I will also say, I wish my colleague from Texas were here, Mr. Roy, and I trust my good friend from Georgia can perhaps relay this to him, because to hear him somehow tout this bill as an example, as a paragon of fiscal responsibility, is too much to bear, having listened to him on this committee every week for the better part of the last 3 years. Let me read you from the Cato Institute what they say about this bill. Last week, the proposed $1.7 trillion discretionary budget represents a $24 billion increase compared to fiscal year 2025 levels. It is $50 billion above the 2023 Fiscal Responsibility Act's budget, non-binding budget targets, which we, of course, played a part in negotiating, as you all will remember, just a few short years ago. And by the way, this doesn't include the $300 billion that Republicans allocated to the Department of Homeland Security, specifically ICE, and the Defense Department last year in the OBBA. So, you all may have your reasons as to why you think that these bills deserve to be passed. I certainly don't. But fiscal responsibility cannot be one of the reasons. Just full stop. The empirical evidence makes that very clear. Fiscal year 2026 will mark the first year since the passage of the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023 that Congress will not have statutorily binding spending caps. So spare us talk of fiscal responsibility when this bill ignores that entirely. To say nothing of, by the way, the discussion around earmarks, and this is not meant for the chairman or the ranking member of the Appropriations Committee. It's meant more for my colleague from South Carolina and in absentia, who has, again, railed about earmarks every meeting that I've attended, and I guess is prepared to vote on a bill that includes every earmark one could conceive of. $1 million for the elevator repair at New York City's Met Opera. I look forward to understanding how the gentleman from South Carolina, again, talk about paragon of fiscal responsibility, how he justifies that vote for his constituents. In any event, the question that I would like to ask of the chairman and the ranking member relates to, of course, the Department of Homeland Security, because the background, the backstory, of course, with respect to the bill that we're considering today, is in the context of what's happening across the country and the serious objections that you've heard from colleagues on my side of the aisle, myself included, and why I'll be voting against this bill when it comes to the floor tomorrow, if it gets there. Mr. Cole, I wonder, you've heard, I'm sure, from many Democratic colleagues of yours about our belief that Secretary Noem should be impeached. And I wonder if you agree with that or what you think of
I'm
impeachment.
not going to speculate on something that hasn't happened, no, I don't agree with that. But if you want to have impeachment, go right ahead. That you have the ability to offer a motion to that deal, but that's really not what we're here to discuss.
Well, we're here to
the
discuss-
appropriations process.
I hear you, but
And funding the rest of the government, most of which is unfunded right now. I mean, right now, we are not paying men and women to defend it. We're not paying the air traffic controllers that brought us all here that flew safely. We're not paying the TSA. We're not funding the government. These other things are important. And I think the Senate, I don't agree with what they did, but they said, okay, let's set aside 2 weeks here and only fund this for 2 weeks. The rest of this stuff is really honestly, you know, extraordinarily important to the country.
Our,
But
our
what this bill
objections,
does is keep funding that
I hear you.
and then leave open this other.
You
area where
made a
people
very
have
impassioned
concern.
case on that. And I think you answered my question. As you heard from the ranking member, as you heard from Ms. Scanlon, and I echo their sentiments, there is a complete lack of trust and a loss of trust with respect to what the Trump administration is doing. There are many of us who will not support the appropriation that, whether it's a continuing resolution or the proposed budget that the House passed last week that we all voted against, and many of us who believe that there must be a change in leadership and that Secretary Noem should be the subject of impeachment proceedings. It sounds like you disagree on that latter point.
I'm
You don't
here
think
to
she should be
talk about
impeached.
appropriations bills, not impeachment. That is not the subject in front of us right here. That's not got anything to do with any of the bills we're working on, simply trying to fund the government. And
That
you know,
sounds like
to
a maybe.
drag it-
That-
Look, if you want to have a theatrical debate.
It's not a
about
theatrical
not the-
debate.
Yes, it is, because it doesn't have anything to do with any of this legislation.
It has everything to
It
do with the
has
Department of Homeland
zero.
Security's budget.
If you want to talk about the Homeland Security budget, I'm happy to talk about the budget. It's not an impeachment issue, it's a budgetary issue. And what's proposed
Is that right?
is a 2-week, yes, it is.
Okay, let me explain why I think that view is misplaced. Secretary Noem has unlawfully impounded funds in violation of the Impoundment Control Act, right? That relates to the budget that the House and the Senate are passing for the department to implement. She
We're
has
not passing
violated
a
the
budget.
law.
We're
That's not a
passing-
question. I'll
Okay,
finish
I'm
and I'll
sorry,
give you an
we're passing
opportunity.
a continuing
I'll give you an
resolution for
opportunity.
2 weeks. Okay. I'm
So
sorry.
your question was, how does the impeachment of Secretary Noem or impeachment proceedings against her concern the Department of Homeland Security budget? And my answer to you is that she has violated the law, in my view, and in the view of many others, in a number of ways as it relates to the money that has been appropriated to her agency. That has included unlawfully impounding funds. That has included obstructing congressional oversight in violation of riders that have been passed in this appropriations bill previously. The record is replete with these examples. That's why I ask you about it. And it's not a gotcha. You answered it. You said you don't agree with it, or you don't think that she should be
If
impeached.
you want to
So
bring
that's
an
your view.
impeachment resolution, by all means do so.
And the reason I ask, as you could probably imagine, is that I didn't hear the same reticence from my Republican colleagues, including you, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, a year and a half ago, when all of you seemed very, very eager to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. I'm sure you recall your vote to impeach him, yes?
Certainly did.
Yeah. There was a mad rush on your side of the aisle to impeach Secretary Mayorkas. I didn't hear anybody at the time say that that was an inappropriate use of the time within the House or the ability of members to be able to pursue. And it sounds like,
I said it didn't have anything to do with an appropriations bill. That didn't have anything to do with an appropriations bill. That was some measure put in front of me. I voted on it. I don't think you'll find I spoke on it or that it was but comes to the floor of the House, you got an obligation to cast a vote. That's appropriate. All I'm saying is I'm here to talk about appropriations. That's what's in front of us. And it's not the package I would have preferred. It's the package that came over from the United States Senate. I still think passing it is better than not passing it. You and I obviously disagree on that. Fair enough.
I appreciate that. Well, I'll certainly agree with you on that last sentiment, which is that you and I disagree on it. There's no, in my view, basis to continue supporting the lawlessness that the agency, ICE in particular, has been perpetrating against the American people in the context of this appropriations bill. And I'll be voting no on that basis. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Jack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is to Chairman Cole. Building upon what my colleague from Georgia mentioned, I mean, this is not just a vote to fund the Coast Guard, to fund FEMA, to fund TSA. There are also quite a few other measures within this legislation we're seeking to fund. So if you could, in the inverse, explain to the committee and explain to all those watching, a no vote on these Senate amendments to HR 7148 equals what?
Well, it equals voting no to 94% of funding the government. So, as important as Homeland Security and that agency is, and the discussion is, I'm not diminishing that. is it really appropriate not to pay anybody that wears the uniform of the United States that's defending us right now? I don't think that is. Is it appropriate not to fund research at the NIH on cancer and Alzheimer's or people in clinical trials? I don't think that is. Is it appropriate not to provide services to the American people that those of us that are most vulnerable need? Look, this is a huge swath of federal government. This is like, taking a sledgehammer to try and get a fly. I mean, I'm not saying the fly is not important. I'm saying this is about funding essentially almost the entire government of the United States, which we are not doing now. The Senate has acted. It's now up to the House to act. Is this what I would have proposed? No. Is this what my colleague, the ranking member? No. We disagree on a lot of things. Is this the approach I would have taken to the Department of Homeland? No. But I would rather fund everything. Look, there are federal employees in every district in America. They ought to get paid for the work they're doing. They are doing important jobs for the country. Why would we shut down every safety agency? Why would we ask air traffic controllers to keep working without getting paid? Why should we ask scientists that are doing important research? I mean, it is inappropriate in my view not to fund the government. Most of the issues we're talking about honestly aren't appropriations issues. You can deal with them in judiciary, you can deal with them in the committees of jurisdiction. Part of the problem the appropriations process has is that everybody tries to put things on it that don't have much to do with it. So again, you want to impeach somebody? Fine, file an impeachment resolution. We have a process to deal with that, not dealt with in the appropriations bill. So again, I'm not going to go home to tell my people that are working hard at Tinker Air Force Base to keep 50 and 60-year-old airplanes flying in combat conditions, they shouldn't get paid because Congress is having a fight over something that's totally unrelated to what they do, which is critically important. I'm not going to look at a young service family and tell them, I'm sorry, you've got a 6-year-old in daycare. We're not sure whether or not we can pay you to do. I'm just not going to do that. This is not what I would have preferred, but I'm going to vote to fund the government of the United States and then let us resolve these other issues through negotiation, through legislation, through adjudication if you need to. But shutting down the government is not a good thing to do. And it endangers and harms people who have done absolutely nothing wrong. And it puts the American people at risk. They may even agree with you about the issues you're concerned about in ICE or Homeland Security. Fair, but I bet you they don't agree that the military shouldn't get paid. I don't think anybody in America believes that, or very few people do. And I think they would think you were reckless in running that kind of a risk. And I don't think, people, again, that are simply doing their job, 99.9% of whom work hard, play by the rules, have discharged the things we ask them to do, shouldn't get paid, or the vital research. So it's just, to me, the remedy is out of proportion to the problem that my friends have. And, if you want to shut down the government for the second time in 3 months, you have the ability to do that. I guess the Senate chose not to do that. They chose a different course, not the one I would have chosen. But at least they looked at what we did together with the Senate and said 5 out of 6 of these things we're okay with. Let's get that done. Let's put a 2-week limit on this other and continue this debate and discussion. I would have preferred a longer period of time, but I don't know how they ended up with 2 weeks, but that's where they're at. And so right now, the government of the United States, not this Capitol complex, because we did fund the ledge branch. We have we have a number of bills in place, but about, over 70% of the government is unfunded and people are doing important things, the American people, and not getting paid. They don't have anything to do with what's going on in Minneapolis one way or the other. So, I grew up in a military family. I grew up with a father that was a military defense worker. After that, had a brother that followed the same course. They worked hard, they played by the rules. They deserve to get paid for what they do when they were doing it. I think the same thing about folks now. You want to have these arguments, discussions, you want to change things, but you don't shut down the government of the United States and freeze everything because you're upset about something that's happened. You deal with that problem within the context of that. You don't shut down the government. But again, people will have a vote. They're entitled to do it. And the Senate chose this thing. It's not what I would have preferred, but I think it's better than shutting down the government.
Well, that is very, very well put, Mr. Chairman, and I think that's what everyone should consider when voting on this after we report out the rule tomorrow. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jack. Ms. Leisure Fernandez, you're recognized.
Hello, Madam Chair, and hello, Chairman and Ranking Member. You know, it's interesting because the other side of the aisle seems to be making the case of why we should restructure Homeland Security because it's got a lot of different pieces in there that don't make sense together. And so, you know, we should take that up. I'm not sure that we would be able to do that right now in these circumstances, but where we're at right now is that when we were last here, the ranking member and Democrats, together with Republicans, have said, listen, there is so much controversy around Homeland Security, let's separate it out. So we had a vote on the two different bills, but it's Republicans who put them back together and sent them over. So
No,
there's
that's actually
there's a creation.
If I may, that's actually not quite accurate. The Senate asked for these bills to be put together. That's part of the negotiation. So yeah, the Republicans put them back together. That was the request of the Senate. And that was the request specifically of my Democratic colleague, Senator Murray. We want all 6 bills together. You wanted it differently in the House, and we accommodated that. The Senate asked for what it got. So please don't blame that on Republicans. Blame it on the Senate, collectively on both sides, you know, but that was the request we got. So, you know, sorry, we sent them what they asked for in the form that they asked for.
So, but
And
what
then
we
they
have-
made a
but what we
decision to
have,
change it,
Chairman,
which they have the right to do.
but
And
what
they
we
sent
have,
it
Chairman,
back.
is we have a problem right now because there was support for funding the other agencies, and we talked about the good work. In fact, you were here last time, and we talked about some of the problems. And in fact, I asked you, do you think it's all right that they are arresting Native Americans for immigration offenses and putting them in detention? And you agreed that that's not an okay thing.
Of course not.
That's not okay. And once you also agreed that it's not all right for them to be arresting any American citizens. In fact, Latinos often look like Native Americans, and that's probably why those Native Americans were arrested, because have darker skin, right?
I have no idea.
You have no idea. But it's not all right to arrest any
No,
citizens for
of course
immigration.
not.
And I think that that's the problem, is it's not all right, and they keep doing that. And when they do that, it's a violation of the 14th Amendment. It's a violation of our basic principles of what it means to be a citizen of the United States, is we should not have ICE going around and arresting hundreds. It's over 200 by now, because the last document we have, it was 170, and that was several months ago. But the other thing that they're doing is they're arresting and pulling people into custody, and then the courts are having to throw them out. 2,300 documented court cases where they are saying you are violating people's due process rights. 2,300. These are court cases. This isn't us lefties or whatever they want to call us. We believe in due process. I would assume you believe in due process as well.
Of course I do,
Okay.
although not really dealt with normally in an appropriations bill. You know, we have all kinds of committees, we have all kinds of legislation. Our legislation is about funding the government.
Right. And when we fund the
did that
government,
in the House. We sent it to the Senate in the way the Senate asked for it to be sent. That's not a legal matter. It's a procedural issue. Nobody's rights are violated by that. We had an agreement with what they would do. They broke that agreement. They have the right to do that. And they've now sent it back to us in another form. So to me, the real question is, do you want to keep the focus on Homeland, which this clearly does, because it's as my friend, the ranking member said, about 10 days of funding. That's all that's in here for Homeland. If you want to vote against it, by all means, go ahead. Then there's the funding for the rest of the government, which was negotiated in a bipartisan fashion, and which was agreed upon by, and honestly, majorities of both parties voted for those funding bills. And now you've got exactly the same thing in front of you, the same thing that a majority of your party voted for and a majority of my party voted for. Why shouldn't that get funded? You want to deal with Homeland separately? That's what the Senate has decided to do. They sent it to you separately. But they put it all in one package. They didn't do what we did in the House and separate it out. They could have sent us over five
So I think-
bills.
I
They
think
could
that-
have sent us over 5 bills and then sent this as a separate package. I don't know why they decided not to do that, but I'm not willing to jeopardize the entire funding of the rest of the government and not pay military families and not pay federal workers and not pay safety workers and not fund FEMA in the middle of a disaster. I'm not willing to do that because I'm mad about this. If other people are, they have every right to do that. But that's the issue in front of us
So,
now.
Ranking Member, I think that part of what we're struggling here in this conversation is that this is a bill that will fund Homeland Security. It will fund CBP and ICE. And the idea that we can now ask anything, that we can send over a check and say, but you don't have to do anything. I think that that is, I can't see how that works. For example, last week or last time you were here, we talked about body cameras, right? There's money in there, but there's no requirement that they be turned on, that they be kept on, and that the footage be available to law enforcement, local as well as federal. That's something that could get included in a funding package. Am I right, Ranking Member?
You're right, but let me just, I'm going to say a couple things because questions haven't been directed to me, so I'm going to take this opportunity to say something. First of all, with the structure and the organization of the Department of Homeland Security, I was appointed to the committee that examined that effort many years ago. And I voted no, particularly because Coast Guard, FEMA, and other pieces were included in that. This was a conglomerate that people rushed to vote for. And my view, a mistake because of those things there. If my colleague, Mr. McGovern, were here, yeah, I passed all 12 bills when I was chair of this, of the Appropriations Committee. I also want to just say to Mr. Roy, $4.5 trillion cuts that biggest cut for the wealthiest and for the biggest corporations. Give us a break on fiscal responsibility. Kristi Noem, let me be clear because I have colleagues who are asking this. I said she should be fired. She would resign. If that now was the case, then we could bring impeachment proceedings. So that's where I am on that. Now, we tried to put in guardrails in the House Homeland Security bill. I have a list of them. I won't go through it, but many of the things that have been out there and we've discussed. Citizens, warrants, body cameras, requirements, etc. That was rejected. And that was what 207 of those, and I'll speak by myself and not everybody else. I said, as I said in my opening remarks, I don't think it took into consideration what we need to be doing with regard to ICE. With what we have here, is 5 bills. I have to repeat this, 5 bills. And this is information that I have distributed. Increases the National Institutes of Health. It has state opioid response grants. It has child care and Head Start. It talks about power of the purse, where we got some of that back. And on a bipartisan basis, overwhelming numbers. We rejected the Trump administration's effort to dismantle the Department of Education. Rental assistance is in there. Homeless assistance is in there. Funding to expand air traffic controllers, personnel, 3.8% for military personnel. Bipartisan basis, we said yes, no. We came to a conclusion. Did we get everything we wanted? Hell no. Did the Republicans get everything they wanted? Hell no. And that's the 5 bills that are there. Look, I've never wanted to run for the United States Senate. Okay, I've been asked in the past, why would I want to go to the other side, to what I call the dark side? You know, when rarely anything gets completed, etc. They came back and they took this thing. And look, we talked about disassociating the two pieces. So you could have that strength of your feeling about 5 bills, and you could have the strength of feeling about the Department of Homeland Security bill. And it is as it was currently structured, and which is something that I am not for. However, what I am for is for the 5 bills that we have passed. And this comes with it's not 2 weeks anymore. There was the 2 weeks. You're now, if this votes on the 3rd, you go to the 13th, it's 10 days. There is not a dime of increase in there for Homeland. It is a continuing resolution. And therefore, it is the same. I want the opportunity in those 10 days to talk about what we want to do in reforming ICE. And it is, and that's there. And I will lay out the same things that we've been talking about. You cannot detain American citizens or deport them. You have to have warrants for people's arrest. You have to require body cameras for people. We have to have an oversight capacity of an agency, which I said in my outset is lawless and is a rogue agency, the way it's currently constructed. Does it need to be reformed? Amen, it does. I'll take those 10 days and see what we can get. And at the end of those 10 days, if we can't decide to go with it, then it's a no vote. And Department of Homeland Security is shuttered, but not Labor HHS, not Department of Transportation and HUD, not Defense, not State, not the other 5 bills, because they're good bills with good things for the people that we care about. And I'll fight for those democratic priorities every day of the week and fight against a lawless and a rogue agency that is taking this country, turning it around, and pitting one person against another and killing American citizens in our streets. We have to change that. We have an opportunity. Without it, we will not have an opportunity.
But part of my problem is I
Madam,
keep hearing Republicans say, oh, we can't do that. Oh, we can't put that in appropriations. We can absolutely put in appropriations, because if we're not going to
Yes, we can.
demand that when they violate the Constitution, Chairman, they said that you cannot, that it's all right to kill somebody because they were carrying a gun, lawfully carrying a gun. And when he was shot down, he was already down, and we were shot. That gun was no longer in his possession. Do you agree with the idea that you can get shot because you're lawfully carrying a gun?
Of course not.
Right.
I don't
So
think
that's a
any American
violation.
agrees with
Of
that.
course not. But how do you enforce that? That's the problem. They're violating the
Well,
First
of
Amendment,
all,
the
there's
Second
an
Amendment, the 14th
investigation
Amendment.
And probably be court cases on this. That's normally how you punish people that break the law. You punish them individually. You don't normally shut down the government of the United States because somebody did something wrong.
Ms.
People do
Ledger
stuff
Fernandez.
wrong all the time.
But
But you don't shut down the entire government. You certainly don't shut down areas where you have negotiated in good faith and have bipartisan,
We're not
bicameral
talking about
agreement.
this. I'm
So if
talking
you want
about
to have
ICE.
this thing, again, I wish the Senate had sent it back
Yeah.
separately. They chose. We accommodated them. We accommodated your Democratic colleagues in the Senate. That's what they wanted. That's
But when
what
I'm
they
talking
asked
about
for.
what can we
accommodated
do?
your
What can we
Democratic
do? And
colleagues
you keep
in the
saying we
House
can't do that in
because you
appropriations.
wanted a
We
separate-
absolutely
You
can do
wanted
that in
a separate
appropriations.
vote on it,
Ms.
and we
Ledger
gave you that.
Fernandez.
It was
So-
Republicans and Democrats in this.
So I think that this is.
Exactly.
Madam Chair.
Republicans.
Republicans and Democrats, but it was specifically a
No,
Democratic.
don't talk over each other, please. We've been doing very well, but
We're
let's
pretty
not talk
passionate.
over each other. I know.
apologize.
This is the Rosa DeLauro we've known to come and love. No. No, so,
I will wrap
Ms.
up. but-
Ledger Fernandez, would you wind it up,
Yeah,
please?
I'll wrap it up. But I think that the frustration you are hearing us say is that we are hearing, including from the chairman, These don't belong in appropriations. And my God, if we are funding it, where else do they belong? And especially when you keep violating every single piece of this Constitution. And in 2026 alone, ICE has violated 96 court orders. So, Mr. Chairman, saying this could go through court isn't working. We need to put it in the language of the bill, and we can. We need to make it enforceable. We need to have accountability, and none of that exists right now. And that's the frustration that Americans are feeling, because Trump is going down on this. Americans don't like what happens. They don't like seeing people gunned down in the street. They don't like the idea that, it's about retribution and revenge. You're going into Maine? My God. Really, Oklahoma has more immigrants than Maine does,
Ms. Leisure
right?
Fernandez.
And the
I don't know what
retribution
the
doesn't make any
population
sense.
in Maine is, but we're certainly proud to have a healthy immigration community in our states.
But they're going into Maine because it's a Democratic state, and they're not going into Oklahoma because it's a Republican state, because that's what Trump has said is he's going to
Well,
have.
actually,
revenge and
that's not
retribution.
correct. I mean, I was with one of my county sheriffs over the break, and there were ICE operations in Oklahoma. He said, the difference is we cooperate with them here. We work well together. So we haven't had the same experience,
That's
but,
not right.
but saying there's not an ICE presence in Oklahoma, I can tell you it's just not true. There is.
There aren't any surges going on in Democratic states. And Madam Chair, with that, I yield back.
Thank you,
I
Ms.
mean, in
Leisure.
Republican states, there's no surges going on in Republican states, and that tells you everything.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure Fernandez. Mr. Griffith, you're recognized.
I don't have any questions, Madam Chair.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Many thanks.
Mr. Norman, you're recognized.
I'll be brief. I think everything's been talked about. You know, what does get me though is the left continues to demagogue what happened, the ICE agents and encourage assaults on police. Yet they stood beside a president who let 15 to 20 million illegals in this country. They stood beside it. They stood behind the children who were left to dry with sex trafficking, didn't say one word about what was happening by the Biden administration that President Trump is trying now to cure. That's what the ICE agents are doing. They're not talking about the 8,000 assault on ICE agents. They're not talking about the young man who unfortunately was killed, but he kicked out a car, a tail light in a car. He should have been arrested, but they let him go with the lax rules as a sanctuary city has. It's so hypocritical. Mr. Cole, you've been around a long time. What's going to happen in 10 days?
I don't think we know. I mean, I think there'll be a serious negotiation. My guess is there'll probably be an extension. I don't think it'll get settled in 10 days, but I'd love to be wrong about that. And we'll probably be up here with some other short-term CR. What I do, and I agree very much with the ranking member on this, I don't see why the rest of government has to be held hostage to this dispute. I don't see why the military needs to be threatened. I don't see why the NIH needs to be threatened. I don't see why the Department of Education needs to be threatened. I don't see why, as my friend pointed out, rent assistance needs to be threatened. So I don't think those people have much to do with this dispute. And if we have to have this, we'll see. I also think, everybody here has commented, and I actually agree with my friend, the ranking member. I wasn't here when Homeland Security was created, but I've seen it as a very ungainly agency with 23 different components, if I remember the number correctly. And I don't think, probably there needs to be, the authorizing committees need to do some pretty serious work and redesign. Again, we don't do that in our committee. That's not our job. Congress has created this entity. Our job is to fund it. We try to arrive at what we think the appropriate level is. We try to put in guardrails. We agree sometimes we don't agree, whatever. But the point is, we worked it out and got it done. The Senate broke the